Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories. A quiet place for gentle tales, slow evenings, and the kind of peace that stays with you long after the story ends. Tonight's story is called A Winter of Letters. It is a soft, emotional journey set in a snowy hospital at the end of a long war. A nurse who writes. A soldier who listens. And the silence between them that says more than words ever could. Let the sound of snow and ink carry you away. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts settle. And now, let us begin. France, winter 1918. A field hospital at the end of a long war. One woman writes words for a man who cannot speak. Snow had been falling since before the morning bell. Not a storm. Not even a proper flurry. Just a slow, deliberate layering, fine white dust that softened the world without silencing it. It fell sideways, gently, across the fields and onto the black rooftops of the village beyond the hospital gates. The hospital had once been a school. Long before trenches, before uniforms, before names were stitched into coats. It still smelled faintly of chalk in the eastern hall, though now that scent was covered by antiseptic, smoke, and the tired damp of linen never quite dry. The soldiers who stayed here rarely spoke of the war. They spoke of boots, of food, of snow, and then, mostly, of nothing. Nurse Elise Moreau rose at dawn. She always did. Not from duty alone, but rhythm. Her steps were steady, practiced, slippers on old wooden floors, a scarf folded twice at her collar, apron smoothed before the mirror with careful hands. She lit the hallway lamp outside the ward, the one that always flickered blue before it settled. She passed room after room, 12 cots in each, blankets tucked, pillows flattened from too much turning. In room C she paused. Bed 17. Still full. Still silent. He had arrived 3 days earlier. No escort. No luggage. Just 2 stretcher-bearers and a crumpled field tag. Private Arthur Brandt. British. Age unknown. No rank beyond survival. His coat was torn at the collar. There was dried blood at his temple, not fresh, and a deep stillness behind his eyes. Not fear. Not panic. Just absence. Dr. Vasseur said there was no head trauma. No visible internal bleeding. The man could breathe, eat, blink, and respond to basic care. He simply did not speak. At all. Elise had watched him the way one might watch a fire long after the flames had gone. Not for danger. For signs of remaining heat. She noticed the way his hands sometimes clenched when the wind pushed through the window panes. Or how he winced at the sound of metal trays clinking. There were no visitors. No records beyond his name. No photographs folded in his pockets. No letters. Only silence, and the weight of something left unfinished. That morning, Elise changed his dressings with careful hands. The skin beneath the gauze was healing well. She touched his arm lightly, then pulled the blanket higher. Still no words. Still no movement. But his eyes opened for a moment. And for the first time, she thought he was looking at her, not through her. At midday, she took a brief rest in the supply alcove. Sat on a stool beside the kettle. The others were tending to an incoming batch of frostbitten soldiers from the eastern ridge. She had half an hour to herself. She used 10 of them to stare at the steam rising from her tea. Madame Arlette found her like that. "You look like someone waiting for an answer," the older woman said, placing a tray on the counter. "What's the question?" Elise didn't answer at first. Then, "Do you think he hears us? The quiet one?" A nod. Madame Arlette pulled a stool beside her and sat. "Some of them hear more than we do," she said. "They just don't waste it on talking anymore." That evening, Elise stood by the window at the end of the ward. The snow was still falling, softly now. In the courtyard below, one of the orderlies was stacking firewood into crooked lines. A magpie hopped along the edge of the fountain, pausing every few seconds to peck at invisible seeds. Inside, the oil lamps buzzed quietly. 12 men breathed in sync. She returned to room C and sat beside Arthur's bed. His fingers twitched once, then went still. She looked at the table beside him. Empty. No letters. No notes. No photographs. And something in her chest tugged, gently but firmly, like a thread catching at the seam of an old coat. That night, after the lights were lowered, she took a clean sheet of paper from the cabinet. Her hands didn't tremble, but they moved slowly, as if they needed permission from something deeper than habit. She sat at the edge of the nurse's station and began to write. Dear Anna, it snowed again today. The kind that sticks to the glass like it's trying to listen in. The nurse says it's early in the season, but I think winter just came early for me. They don't say much here, but I hear everything. The creak of boots, the way the door clicks twice before it closes, the sigh that comes from the man 2 beds over. I miss the way you hummed when you stirred soup. Even when you forgot the words. I don't know if I'll write again tomorrow, but I want to. She folded it carefully. No signature. No date. She placed it beside his bed, on top of the small water glass. Then she left. The next morning, the letter was gone. She did not ask where. She did not see it in his hands. But when she changed his bandage later, his fingers brushed hers softly, once, as if he meant to hold something but had forgotten what. The following night she wrote again. Dear Anna, I saw a crow on the windowsill this morning. It stared like it knew something I didn't. Then it flew off without a sound. The nurse who brings tea smiled at me today. Just once. I think I frightened her. There's still something left inside me. I don't know what. But I think I'd like to find out. On the 4th night, she read the letter aloud before placing it on the table. He didn't move. But when she returned the next morning, the cup was moved. Slightly. Tilted. As though someone had leaned toward it in the dark. And then, one night, Elise did something she hadn't done in weeks. She wrote a letter to herself. Not signed. Not dated. But real. You are not broken just because you carry other people's quiet. You are not wrong to feel too much. You are not lost because he cannot answer. You are writing for someone else, but you are also writing your way back home. She folded that one tightly, placed it in her coat, kept it, and then she wrote once more. To Anna. For Arthur. For both. If I ever come home, I want to remember this moment, the snow, the silence, and the soft sound of paper folding like breath. Sometimes, words do not need a voice. They only need a listener. The 7th letter was shorter than the rest. Elise wrote it quickly, standing at the nurse's station just before the morning rounds began. The oil lamp flickered beside her elbow, and the snow beyond the window had turned to sleet, sloppy, gray, forgettable. Still, she folded the paper carefully. Dear Anna. The tea was too bitter today. I drank it anyway. It reminded me of how you used to make it, always just a little wrong, but always just for me. They say the war may end soon. But nothing ends when the clocks stop. That's not how time works. It folds. It waits. She placed it beside Arthur's water glass, where she knew he'd see it. Where he always did. Arthur never reached for the letters when she was in the room. But he did something else. Tiny things. Things only she noticed. He blinked a moment longer when she read to him. His fingers tapped the blanket in a rhythm that matched the pacing of her words. Once, his eyes followed her hand as she folded a letter in half, as if watching something familiar being born. They had not spoken. Not once. Not yet. But she no longer doubted that he heard her. That week, she kept writing. Each night. Each letter. It had become a ritual, soft as breath. Tea at 9. Brief walk in the corridor. Glance at the dark sky. Then pen to paper. 1 page. Never more. She would fold it in 2, crease the edge, and place it on the same table each time. And every morning, it was gone. Sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of it in his hand before he tucked it beneath the blanket. Sometimes it wasn't there at all. But once, just once, she saw something that stopped her breath. She entered quietly, as she always did, the letter already folded in her pocket. The room was quiet, filled with the slow inhale and exhale of sleep and morphine. And Arthur's eyes were open. He was reading the 5th letter, holding it with both hands. His eyes moved line by line slowly. He did not blink. When she entered, he paused, then placed the letter on his chest. He said nothing. She said nothing. But the silence was no longer empty. In the nurse's dining room, Elise said nothing about it. But inside, something shifted. She began writing letters not only about what might comfort him, but about what comforted her. Dear Anna, when I was 12, I lived in a small house near a vineyard. My mother baked bread every Sunday morning. I remember the smell more than the taste. I think memories work like that, not sharp, but soft around the edges. Sometimes I wonder if you remember the same things. The same house. The same orchard. Maybe memories are just letters we forgot to send. Dr. Vasseur glanced at Arthur's file later that week. Still mute? He asked, scribbling. Elise nodded, gently adjusting the blanket near his shoulder. He listens, she said softly. The doctor looked at her. Not unkindly. Just long enough to suggest he'd heard more than she had spoken. Then he moved on. Later that day, while taking inventory in the linen room, Elise opened her journal again and wrote to herself. Maybe I'm writing for someone who never existed. Or maybe I'm helping someone return to who they were. But does it matter? If he feels warmth, if I feel less alone, then the rest is just paper. That night, snow returned. Heavy this time. She wrote another letter, slower than usual. The wind shook the window frames, and one of the lamps sputtered out. But her hand stayed steady. Dear Anna, I saw a woman today who reminded me of you. Not her face, but the way she stood, like she was ready to fight the cold with nothing but her breath. I wonder if you'd recognize me now. I wonder if I'd recognize you. Do people become someone else while waiting? In the room, Arthur slept with his back to the door. She placed the letter beside the empty glass again. But this time, she left her hand there a moment longer. As she turned to go, she thought, just for a second, she saw his hand twitch. Not accidental. Not reflex. Like a breath drawn with care. The following day, she found the letter not missing, but creased differently. It had been folded again. Not by her hand. She didn't smile. Not exactly. But she breathed deeper than she had in days. In the days that followed, the ritual deepened. Each letter had more of her in it. More honesty. Less pretending. There was no Anna anymore. There was just the page. And the man who read it. I don't know if you remember what music sounds like. But there's a rhythm to snow. When it falls fast and heavy, it hisses like a whisper too close to the ear. I don't miss the world. I miss the parts of it that didn't ask anything from me. I miss being someone before someone else got hurt. One morning, she entered and found a folded piece of paper waiting for her. It was not written. But it had been placed in the exact spot she always left hers. No words. Just a gesture. She placed it in her apron pocket. And that night, her letter began. I think this is the first time you wrote back. Some silences carry more voices than we think. The hospital shifted with the snow. Not in walls or structure, but in mood, in the hush that settled deeper into the wood, in the way voices fell to murmurs before reaching corners, and in how the patients watched their windows as though something in the white was trying to remember them. Elise noticed the changes as she did everything, quietly. Without interruption. She moved like a memory, soft and useful, her presence always expected but never loud. And perhaps it was that same stillness that allowed her to notice what most others didn't. Arthur was reading the letters now. Not just holding them. Not just placing them under his pillow or beside the glass. He read them. Every line. With the same care she had written them. It began with a glance. His eyes tracking the movement of her hand across the page as she wrote at the station desk. Then came the soft shift in posture when she read aloud to others nearby, and he paused, listening, perhaps not to content, but to cadence. Finally, one morning, she arrived at his cot and found the previous letter still unfolded, placed neatly across his lap. The crease was smooth, the ink slightly smudged. And though he didn't look at her, his hand rested on the edge, 2 fingers curled gently around the paper's margin, like someone protecting something they hadn't earned but needed. That night, Elise didn't write, "Dear Anna." She didn't write any name at all. She simply began, "When I write to you now, I don't imagine anyone else. Not anymore. There's something in your silence that teaches me to slow down. To listen. To say less but mean more. You don't have to speak. I think I'm beginning to understand your voice between the folds of this page." In the ward, life continued its patient, strange rhythm. Some men were leaving. Others were arriving, carried in half-conscious, groaning or ghost-eyed. The mornings belonged to the nurses, the evenings to the doctors, and the nights to the men who could not sleep. Among them now was Louis, younger than most, with a shoulder wound and a restless mind. He had arrived with a tattered journal, half full, pages torn and restapled. He spoke quickly at first, too quickly, asking questions no one had answers to. But soon he slowed, and began watching, listening, to Elise, to Arthur, to what passed silently between them. One afternoon, Elise was cleaning his wound when Louis tilted his head toward Arthur's bed. "You write to him?" he asked. She glanced up, then returned to dabbing the cloth across the stitched skin. "I used to write as him," she said softly. "Now, I'm just writing." Louis smiled faintly. "To him, then?" She didn't nod. But she didn't deny it either. "He listens," Louis added. "You know that, right?" She paused. "I think so. He folds the letters," he said, voice lowering, "like someone who wants to remember what's inside." Then, quieter, "I wish someone wrote to me like that." That evening, Elise sat longer than usual at her desk. The oil lamp hummed. Outside, snow thickened again, layering the windows until they became pale canvases of frost. She wrote slowly, carefully. They moved 2 more cots today. Someone said the war might end by spring. But here, nothing ends. It only changes shape. I watched you read. You don't hide it anymore. I wonder if it brings you peace, or just keeps you from slipping too far. I hope it's both. She signed nothing, but she folded the paper with reverence, as if her own silence had weight now too. The following morning, the letter was not by the cup. Not under the blanket. Not on the floor. She looked around once, and then saw it. Folded into the pages of his journal. Her breath caught. He had kept it. Not hidden it. Not discarded it. But stored it with care. Later that day, Louis said nothing as she passed. But he offered her a look, a small nod, full of understanding. As if saying, he heard it too. The next letter was different. She didn't write about weather or war or windows. She wrote what she truly meant. You don't know me speech. But I will keep writing, until the paper is all used, or until I feel quiet in my own chest again. You don't have to return to who you were. I'm learning to be with who you are now. That, I think, is what peace might look like. When she placed it on his table that night, she didn't linger. But as she walked away, she heard the soft rustle of paper, not just movement, but care. The sound of someone unfolding something not to read, but to hold. Some letters are not meant to be delivered. They are meant to keep us whole. The snow had stopped by nightfall, but the wind remained, cold, sharp, impatient. It pressed against the windows of the ward like a voice too tired to speak, only hum. Inside, the hospital moved in its slow ritual. Bandages changed, water warmed, patients drifting in and out of morphine sleep. The fire in the kitchen had gone low. The hall smelled of salt and boiled cloth. Arthur hadn't moved much that day. His hands had stayed still, eyes half closed, distant. Not unwell. Not worse. Just quieter. More than usual. Elise had written the day's letter before her shift ended. Folded it neatly. But as she approached his bedside, she paused. His eyes were closed, his hands tucked beneath the blanket, but his posture was different. Drawn inward, like someone listening for something far away. She stood there for a moment, uncertain. Then quietly, without placing the paper on the table, she turned and walked away. After midnight the halls emptied. Only the wind remained, and the occasional creak of old wood shifting in its bones. She sat alone in the corridor by the window, the one no one used anymore. The night lantern flickered softly above her, casting thin golden lines across the floor. Her coat was pulled tight around her shoulders, though it did little to hold back the cold. In her lap, a blank sheet of paper. She hadn't meant to write. Not tonight. But silence had weight. And this silence pressed at her chest like a full breath she couldn't release. Her fingers ached from the day's work. The bones in her neck pulled tighter with each hour. Still, she reached for her pen. Still, the ink touched the page. This letter is not for you. Not really. Not the way the others were. I've written so many words for you now that I wonder if I'm still writing for you, or for myself. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the act is the answer. She paused. The wind stirred outside, dragging a low whistle through the windowsill. She could hear someone snoring faintly 2 rooms over. A cough. The creak of a chair shifting on old tile. But none of it reached her. She was elsewhere. Her hand moved again. I remembered something today. A summer when I was 15. We went to visit my uncle's farm near the Loire. There was a pear tree behind the barn, and I climbed it, barefoot, in a dress far too light for the bark. I cut my palm on a knot in the wood. I bled for hours. But I didn't cry. I laughed. Because the sun was so warm, and the fruit tasted like it belonged to me. I haven't thought about that day in years. Not until this afternoon, when I saw a patient tear his bandage and smile as if pain meant he was still real. She looked at the letter in her lap. The ink was already fading at the edges where her thumb had touched it. She whispered into the stillness. Who am I writing to, really? And still, her hand continued. You don't speak. But I think I do enough for both of us. I talk to you with paper. And maybe it's safer this way. Words on a page can't leave. They can't flinch. They don't ask for anything in return. But they also don't hold your hand when you need them to. A floorboard creaked nearby. She froze. Just a nurse, moving in the shadows. No one saw her. No one interrupted. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Time feels different now. Like it moves sideways. Not forward. Not back. Just around me. I forget how long I've been here. Sometimes I forget what season it is, even with the snow outside. I write, I walk, I fold linen. I speak gently. I leave the room. But inside, I think I'm waiting. For something. Or someone. Or myself. Elise laid down the pen. The candle beside her had burned nearly to the base. She stared at the page, not to reread it, not to judge it, just to feel the shape of what she'd released. She didn't fold the letter. She didn't sign it. She let it rest on her lap like something asleep. Then, slowly, she rose. Carried the page to her room. Opened the drawer beside her narrow bed. And placed the letter inside. No ribbon. No envelope. Just paper. Then she whispered, softly, to the drawer or to herself. That one stays with me. In the morning, the snow returned. Soft, dry flakes, drifting like they'd never left. She moved through her rounds as usual. Tea. Temperature checks. Bandages. But when she entered room C, Arthur was awake. And he was watching her. She placed the day's letter beside his cup. And before she could step away, he reached out. Not for the cup. Not for her hand. But for the paper. He picked it up. Unfolded it. Read, silently, completely, openly. And for the first time, while still holding the letter, he looked directly into her eyes. Not long. Not with tears. Just presence. Real. Here. That night, Elise opened her drawer again, unfolded the letter to no one, and added a line at the bottom. Maybe this was always for me. Some replies do not need paper. Only stillness. Only eyes. The snow turned to sleet by afternoon, and with it came the wind. It rushed over the valley with sudden force, dragging frozen branches across stone walls, rattling the hospital shutters like thin hands knocking on old doors. Inside, the world grew dim. The lamps flickered twice, then died. There was no panic. The generator sputtered once in the cellar and stopped. Madame Arlette lit 2 candles. The nurses moved like phantoms, practiced and calm, hands knowing where everything was even in near darkness. Only the patients stirred. For many, light was only a comfort. But for some, for men like Arthur, darkness returned memories they had no wish to revisit. Elise finished her rounds early that day. Her hands were cold from changing water in the basins, and the wool of her apron felt heavier than usual. The air smelled faintly of ash and steam. She wrote by the candle in the hallway, the one near the closed supply door, where the flame bent with every gust from under the sill. Her letter was brief, but honest. You looked at me yesterday. Not just a glance. A gaze. You saw me, and I saw you. If you do nothing else today, just remember that it happened. She folded it slowly, then rose and moved toward room C. The sleet had grown harsher, its sharp rhythm tapping at the glass like impatient fingers. When she reached his bedside, Arthur was awake. His eyes followed her, and for the first time in days, he did not look away when she approached. She placed the letter gently on his blanket. He didn't move to touch it, but his breath deepened. That was enough. She turned, meaning to leave, but Louis's voice stopped her in the hallway. You should read it to him, he said softly from his cot, voice hushed but not joking. Elise turned back, uncertain. He's listening, Louis added. You know that. He always is. The candlelight behind her pulsed with the wind. She hesitated, then stepped back inside. The room was lit only by 2 lanterns, one at the far wall, one near the window. Arthur blinked, but said nothing. She sat, unfolded the letter, and read. Her voice was barely louder than a breath, but in the stillness, it filled the space between them. You looked at me yesterday. Not just a glance. A gaze. You saw me, and I saw you. If you do nothing else today, just remember that it happened. She stopped. The wind howled once through the vents. Arthur's eyes didn't close. They stayed on hers. And then, his hand moved. Not quickly. Not clearly. But deliberately. He reached down, turned the paper over, and pressed his finger once against the back. When he lifted it, a single fingerprint, faintly smudged in the candlelight, marked the page. It wasn't a word. Not a name. But it was his. And it was enough. She looked at the mark, and something warm settled in her chest. Not like hope. More like acceptance. The moment was real. He had answered. The wind moaned again, louder this time. Outside, something cracked. A branch, or maybe part of the stable roof. Someone called from the yard. The guard, perhaps. The world kept moving. But inside room C, it had stopped, just for a moment. Later, while refilling the oil in the hallway lamps, Madame Arlette approached her. You're quieter tonight, she said gently. Elise offered a tired smile. I think I was heard. That night, she didn't write a new letter. Instead, she returned to her drawer and unfolded one of the earliest ones, a note written in the first week, when she had still signed it Anna. She reread it slowly. Not out of pride, but out of gratitude. I haven't spoken in a while, but I think of you every time the wind shifts. She touched the paper once more, and let it rest. In the morning, the storm had passed. The rooftops glistened beneath a soft new layer of snow. The branches had stopped their scratching. The windows steamed gently in the sunlight. Arthur was awake again. The letter was gone. But on the table by his bed lay a new page. Blank. Folded. deliberate, waiting. Not all storms come with thunder. Some arrive on silent feet and sit beside the bed. The snow that morning was so light it could hardly be seen. It hovered in the air, refusing to land. Elise stood at the far window of the ward and watched the sky for a full minute before realizing she was holding her breath. The world was quiet, but not still. And there was something in the quiet that pressed gently against her ribs, not urgently, but persistently, like a question waiting for an answer she wasn't ready to give. Arthur had not moved much since yesterday. The nurses said it was natural. The doctor, quiet as ever, wrote his notes with the same crisp pen strokes. But Elise knew better. She felt it in the way his breathing barely stirred the blanket. In how his hands no longer searched for the letters she left. In how his eyes stayed closed even when the morning bell rang. Something had shifted. He was still here, but only just. She went through her morning rounds as always. Measured temperatures. Changed linen. Wiped down basins. But everything felt thinner. Even her steps. Even her voice. That afternoon, as she sat near the storeroom door with a blank page in her lap, she thought for a long time before she began to write. Then slowly, the words came. "You're still breathing. But I think the rest of you is halfway gone. I watch your face for signs. I count the seconds between breaths. I listen for coughs that don't come. But mostly, I try to memorize you. Because I know these days are soft, and soft things don't stay." She paused. Her hand trembled slightly. She hadn't felt cold until now. She thought of her first winter in the hospital. Back before the war had turned quiet pain into common routine. A soldier had died suddenly, unexpectedly. He had spoken to her just an hour before. She hadn't written anything for him. And that haunted her for weeks. She hadn't given him a place to remain. This time she would. "If this is our last letter, let it be soft. Let it be clean. Let it say nothing complicated. You were seen. You were cared for. You were more than what they wrote in your file. You are still more." She signed it. Elise. Then folded it slowly. Smoothed the crease with both hands. Held it against her chest for a moment before rising. When she entered his room, the light had changed. The sky had dimmed with the setting sun. The lamps flickered low. And in that warm, golden half-light, Arthur looked almost like a boy again, face still, lashes long against his cheek. She placed the letter by his pillow, sat beside him, and said nothing. Her hands rested in her lap. Her knees touched the edge of his blanket. Her shoulder leaned against the chair back the way it always did. But inside, everything had stopped moving. He opened his eyes. Slowly. Barely. But enough. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. Only held his gaze. He blinked once. And something in her breath gave way. Not grief. Not fear. Just knowing. She reached for his hand, not to hold it, but to warm it. It was cold at the fingertips. Still alive. But quiet. Like earth just before frost settles in. Louis passed behind the curtain, carrying fresh towels. He paused. Then gently said, "He knows." Elise didn't answer. But she looked back down at Arthur's face. And whispered, "So do I." That night she didn't return to her writing desk. She didn't light the lamp. She didn't open the drawer where the letters lay in neat stacks. She sat at the foot of his bed, with her knees pulled to her chest, and waited. Not for death. For the moment before. That moment when time pauses. When the room forgets its shape. When the breathing slows, and slows again, and doesn't quite stop, but becomes something smaller than breath. At some point, hours later, she spoke. Not to fill the silence, but because it asked her to. She said, "You don't have to stay for me. But thank you for letting me be here." Arthur didn't answer. But his hand moved once. A small, tired motion. Toward the edge of the bed. Elise reached out. Touched it gently. Pressed it back under the covers. And sat with him. until the lamp burned out. And the night was complete. Some farewells are not spoken. They are folded, sealed in silence, and left behind with care. The sky was colorless. Not gray. Not white. Just absent. As though even the light had grown tired of returning. The windows of the ward remained misted, and the snow beyond them fell in slow spirals, not landing, not ending, just circling. Inside, the air was still. So still that Elise could hear the soft creak of her own boots against the wooden floor. She had crossed that corridor 100 times. But never like this. She knew the moment she opened the door. Arthur's chest was still. Too still. His face calm, his mouth relaxed. His body held no tension. No pain. No presence. She stood there for a long time. Watching. Breathing, for both of them. There were no doctors. No machines. No family to be called. Just her. And a silence that deserved reverence. She moved carefully. Not because she feared breaking something. But because it felt like everything was already breaking, and she didn't want to disturb the quiet too soon. She took a warm cloth from the basin, dampened it, and wiped his hands, gently, with small circles, as if tending to a sleeping child. She smoothed the blanket over his chest. Adjusted his collar. There was no need. But there was meaning. Her fingers lingered at his shoulder. Where the bone had once flinched under her touch, weeks ago, when he'd first arrived. He had changed. So had she. She pulled a chair to his bedside. Saturday. Listened. Listened to nothing. But it wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had passed between them. Letters. Looks. Gestures that never made noise, but always made sense. She remembered a day years before the war. Standing at the river with her older sister, watching a dog swim across the current. The sun was warm, the air thick with summer. Her sister had whispered, "Nothing is ever really gone. It just changes what it's made of." She hadn't understood then. She did now. From the pocket of her apron, Elise took a single sheet of paper. She hadn't known why she'd carried it all morning. Now she did. She lit the small lamp on the desk beside the bed. Saturday. And wrote, "Dear Arthur, you didn't speak. But I heard you. In every blink, in every breath, in every time your hand moved toward the letter even before I placed it down, you were speaking. You taught me that silence is not emptiness. That stillness can be its own kind of song." The pen scratched gently across the page. She paused. Wiped her eyes. But no tears came. Only warmth. "I don't know who you were before this war. I don't know what dreams you carried into the trenches, or what you left behind there. But here, in this ward, in these weeks, you are someone. You mattered. And I will carry your silence with me, not as absence, but as memory." She signed it. Elise Moreau. Folded the paper slowly. Pressed it flat with her palm. Then tucked it under the blanket, just above his heart. She stood. Leaned forward. Pressed her lips to her fingers, then touched his forehead with them, lightly, reverently. And whispered, "Thank you." She stepped out into the corridor. The lamps were dim. The ward half asleep. But time had changed. It no longer moved forward. It settled. Madame Marlette met her near the stairs. She did not ask what had happened. Only took Elise's hand in both of hers and said, "He waited for you." Elise nodded. Then added quietly, "So did I." That night, Elise did not write. She walked to the nurse's archive, opened the drawer where she had placed his letters, all of them, and sat on the floor beside it. She read the first one aloud. Then the second. Then the last. And when she reached the final page, the one signed with her real name, she didn't cry. She simply whispered, "I meant every word." In the morning, a young volunteer passed by the linen closet and saw her still there, curled up beside the letters. He asked carefully, "Were those all for him?" She looked up, blinking, smiled. "Yes," she said. "And one for me." Some stories are not meant to end, only to wait. Spring returned like a visitor unsure of its welcome. It came softly, with water dripping from stone ledges, and the scent of turned earth rising gently in the mornings. Windows opened again. Boots no longer clomped with urgency through the halls. No more stretchers. No more shouting. Just the slow unraveling of all that had been tightly held together. The war was over. But the building still remembered. Elise remained long after the others had gone. Some were reassigned. Some left quietly. A few married. A few didn't return at all. But she stayed, to help close the ward with the same gentleness with which she had once kept it alive. She folded the last linen by hand. She wrapped gauze rolls as though someone might still need them. She polished the brass handles of the medicine cabinets, though no one had touched them in weeks. It felt like dressing a body for burial. Not out of sorrow, but out of care. She passed room C often, but only entered it once more, on her final morning. Arthur's bed was no longer there. The frame had been moved. But the light still slanted through the shutters at the same angle, and she could still trace, by memory, the exact place where he once blinked at her in silence. She stood there for a long time, then stepped to the drawer beneath the side table, and opened it. Inside, a bundle, neatly tied. Her letters. Every one. Some pages worn. Others smudged faintly at the edges where fingers had held them. She untied the ribbon slowly. Read the top letter. Then the next. And then stopped. Not because she couldn't go on, but because she didn't need to. These were never meant for history. But they weren't meant to disappear either. That afternoon, she returned to the room with a clean sheet of paper. She sat at the empty desk where no one had written in months, lit a small oil lamp, even though the sun was still up, and wrote her final note. To whoever finds these, you may never know who we were. You may never learn the sound of his voice, or the look in his eyes. But know this, he was not forgotten. And neither will you be. Read gently. These are not stories. These are breaths left behind. Elise Moreau. She folded the note, placed it on top of the bundle, tied it again, tighter this time. Not to seal it. To hold it. Then placed the bundle in the drawer, left it unlocked, and closed it softly. Madame Marlette found her later in the supply closet. Ready? She asked, smiling gently. Elise nodded. She paused one last time by the stairwell, looked back, and whispered, Some voices stay, then walked away. Years passed. The hospital became a school once more. Children filled the halls with laughter too bright to carry memory. The drawers were repurposed, the beds dismantled, the walls repainted. But the drawer in room C remained untouched, stuck by humidity or fate. Until, one spring, a boy looking for chalk pried it open. He found the letters. Not one. All of them. Tied in faded ribbon. Resting beside a note with no date. He sat on the floor, and read the first. Then the second. Then the rest, without stopping. He took the bundle home in secret. Hid it in his closet. Read them again by candlelight, as if reading them aloud to someone who might still be listening. He did not speak of them to anyone. But he began writing. Not fiction. Not confession. Letters. His own. Dear unknown. Today I found words meant for someone else. And yet they fit me. I don't know your name. But I know your ache. I know what it means to carry silence like breath. That boy became a writer. His books were not about war. But in each of them, there was one page, always near the middle, where two characters sat in stillness. Where no words were spoken. Where something passed between them that no reader could quite name. And every time, beneath the copyright page, he added a dedication. For E, and those who spoke with folded pages. The letters now rest in a museum. Behind glass, beside a wool scarf and a copper lamp. Most visitors walk past. Some stop. And those who do, read more slowly. Breathe more softly. and leave changed. Because sometimes the story you need most isn't the one you're told. It's the one you find. Some endings are not for closing, but for carrying. The snow still finds me. All these years later, I live in a quiet village where the wind moves gently through the trees and the roofs slouch under the weight of winter. And still, when it falls heavy and slow, I feel it again. The hush. The hospital. His eyes. I am old now. My hair has grayed. My hands are slower with the tea kettle. My bones know the ache of years that I do not count aloud. I live in a cottage of 2 rooms and 3 windows. I have no family left, but neighbors who smile gently when they pass. They know me as the nurse with the journals. They don't ask what's inside them. I think they know better. There are days I wake before dawn and sit beside the fire, listening to the wind stir the chimney. And I wonder if that sound, that soft, hollow rhythm, is him. Or maybe it's the echo of all the things I never said aloud. I never married. Not because I could not love, but because the kind of love I met in that ward, the quiet, steady, listening kind. It taught me to be whole, even in stillness. It taught me that presence is enough. Once, years ago, a young writer came to visit. He'd read about the letters. Found a copy of my name in an archive. He asked if he could see them, touch them, understand them. I let him hold only one. Just one. He cried. Quietly. And I said nothing. Before he left, he asked me what Arthur had meant to me. I thought for a long time, and answered simply. He gave me back the part of myself that I had wrapped in silence. I still keep the last letter in a box by my bed. The one I wrote after he was gone. I don't reread it often, but I know every word. And sometimes, when the snow falls just right, I unfold it. Not to grieve, but to remember what it feels like to be completely human. I've spent years in service since then. Other hospitals. Other names. Other hands in mine. But no one has ever taught me more than the man who never said a word. There's something I've learned in these decades that no book taught me. Grief isn't the opposite of joy. It's the residue of love. And silence is not the absence of life. It's the space where memory breathes. If I could write one last letter, if my hands could shape ink the way they once did, this is what I'd say. Dear you. You who has found this story, or lived one of your own. Know this. You matter. Even in your quiet. Especially in your quiet. You don't have to speak loudly to be real. You don't have to be remembered by many to leave something behind. All it takes is one person who listened. One moment of care. One folded page. I was not extraordinary. I was not brave. I was not broken. I was simply there. And that was enough. Now, as I sit with a blanket across my lap and a journal I no longer need to write in, I smile when I think of it. The snow still comes. The stories still matter. And somewhere out there, maybe someone is writing one of their own. Softly, slowly. Because they once read mine. So if you are reading this, or hearing it, or carrying it in your chest, take this blessing. May you find someone to write to. May you find someone who reads you. And if not, may your silence speak anyway. I was Elise. And I listened. Thank you for spending this quiet hour with me. If the story stayed with you, consider subscribing to Deep Sleep Stories, where each week a new journey awaits, written to calm your heart and soothe your sleep. Until next time, may your dreams be still, your nights be kind, and your silence full of meaning.